First of all, Marta, thanks for organising us all this morning. I'm delighted to have Dr. Mike Harrison joining us this morning, who's doing his PhD, and I'll let him introduce himself and his work today. But just for those of you who are new to the incubator, welcome, and I hope in this little community you find your tribe. We're actually a really nice bunch of people involved in the incubator, and really the incubator, the mission for this, I suppose, organisation is to really build capacity and to build a community of clinical education researchers. So we've a number of initiatives, including this Getting Started series. And the focus of this series is very much on that kind of first time early career researcher dipping their toes, particularly into qualitative research, which I think, as clinicians is really difficult to do sometimes. We grow up in university with a focus, quite rightly, on evidence-based practice. And when it comes to clinical education research, our focus is a little bit different in terms of the questions that we ask and the methods that we use to answer that as well. And one of those particularly, I suppose, challenging areas to get to grips with is always around how do we analyze our qualitative data. It's one thing to do our interviews and to do our focus groups, but actually how do we go about somehow garnering some kind of cohesive argument and narrative from those interviews and translate that into something meaningful that we can use to inform our education practice or to make things better for our students and for our learners. So I'm particularly delighted to have Mike here today to guide you through some of that. Just a quick note about the incubator as well, that we do have a directory on the incubator website as well for those of you looking for, I suppose, mentors, coaches, people who might be interested in maybe collaborating and supervising. So within the directory on the website, you'll see details for lots of us who are involved in the incubator, which is obviously a very, it's a voluntary organization, and we all come at it from very different perspectives and backgrounds, clinical backgrounds, non-clinical backgrounds. I'm here in the very sunny southeast of Ireland today, which is amazing. And so as a group of individuals, we come from lots of different areas and backgrounds as well. So that all said, Mike, I'm going to let you get started. And then what we'll do is at the end then of Mike's kind of first bit, we'll have some questions and time for questions. Mike has some activities for us to do, and then we'll come back at the end for a discussion then. So I hope you'll all be furiously taking notes about the questions that you have for Mike, and please do direct them at Mike, and I'll try my best to help with that as well. And yeah, and keep a note of anything that doesn't sound quite familiar or anything you've questions about. This is your space to ask it today. So Mike, thank you and welcome.
Thank you very much, and thanks for the introduction there. So my name's Mike. I am a GP clinically, and I'm currently doing a PhD as part of an NIHR-funded doctoral research fellowship that's hosted by Newcastle University. So today, basically we've got about 45 minutes. There's a presentation initially, then there's an interactive exercise where hopefully we'll go into some breakout rooms and actually get the chance to practice a little bit of analysis, and then we'll come back together and answer any questions you have. So just one of the great things about the incubator is that it's not just for kind of medical learners, it's for all healthcare professions. So and also there's often a range of experiences, although as Prof Barrett mentioned, it's kind of aimed at early careers researchers aiming to kind of dip their toes in qualitative research, but people may already have experience that they can harness. So do you want to just write in the chat function, one is your healthcare profession and any previous experience in qualitative research type, and that you could write the type and the level of involvement if you wish. I'll just give you a second to do that, just to see who we've got in the room at the moment. Thanks for that, Gemma. Obviously, based on your previous experience, what you will take away will differ between different people, and that's absolutely fine. And some of these concepts may be very new to some people, and to others it may be a refresher. So you may well take different things from today's session. Let's go have a look in the chat. Hello, Emily, thank you. Anyone else want to write? If you don't, that's absolutely fine. Oh, here we go. Non-clinical, yep. Resident doctor, about to start analysis. Thanks for that, Olivia. Nutritionist Mark Sudlow, welcome, Mark. Yes, Susan, radiation. So that's really, really great. So you're doing an MSc in medical clinical education. Okay. So actually, it is very much kind of a multi-professional environment here today. Wow, forensic medicine, some experience. Yeah, fantastic. Well, thanks for that. And some complete novices, some with some experience. So I'm just going to go back to my slides. So basically what we'll go through is what is qualitative analysis, the principles of analysis, the common types of analysis and their use, a bit about quality and rigor, and then there will be an exercise as well with some small groups. So when you've earlier in the Getting Started series, there was a session by Doyen, one of my colleagues, about collecting data using focus groups and interviews. And when you've done that, you're going to come out with some kind of raw data, whether that be an audio recording or often a transcription of a focus group or interview. Or increasingly, if you've done a virtual interview or focus group online, you might have an AI transcribed version. But you need to move from that raw data to something meaningful. So it's moving to some form of explanation, understanding or interpretation of the phenomena. The phenomena is a thing you're researching. And it is a qualitative analysis, a systematic approach that aims to deconstruct the data, reconstruct it, and importantly, interpret it. Okay. And that last bit is really important, and we'll come to that. It's called thematic analysis. It's a form of interpretation. That's the exemplar we'll give today's thematic analysis. So basically, this is a really nice quote. Analysis is a breaking up, separating or disassembling of research materials into pieces, parts, elements or units, with facts broken down into manageable pieces. The researcher sorts and sifts them, searching for types, classes, sequences, processes, patterns or wholes. The aim of this process is to assemble or reconstruct the data in a meaningful or comprehensive fashion. So it's systematic, deconstructing, reconstructing and interpreting. So why is this needed? And this reflects back to what Prof. Barrett was saying then. So in qualitative research, we're often aiming to explore and interpret complex social phenomena, which often involves human experiences and subjective perspectives. And we're often looking to gain insights into behaviors, emotions, and attitudes. And this is more important than measuring kind of how many or how much, which is often what we're doing in the kind of quantitative research. And we often aim to describe phenomena. So, for example, we did a research project aiming to describe the barriers of involving GP trainees and the teaching of medical students in primary care. That was my first qualitative research project. You might want to explore how students transition from parts of their learning across the continuum of learning. We often aim to generate theory and explanation. That's quite important because often the social world is rapidly changing. So new issues are arising that social scientists want to research. And we're often generating theory when there's not a lot of existing understanding of a topic, and we don't know why something is happening. Two kind of methodologies you may have heard of in relation to generating theory are grounded theory. Grounded theory uses a systematic inductive approach that generates theory directly from the collected data. And also realist, and that's mentioned at the bottom. And we'll have a little chat about that. It's really important to recognise that this process, although when you read a qualitative research paper, it looks really neat and tidy, the end product looks like that, but the whole process is actually really, really messy. It's non-linear, what we call iterative, when you go back and forth to the analysis, to you reread, reanalyze, and it can take quite a while. It's quite slow. This, if I'm going to give you one of the take-home messages of today, it's really, really important to make clear what your research paradigm is. So if you haven't been to the sessions before this, you may need to go away and do a little bit of reading because it can take you a little while to get your head around. But there was a session on choosing methodologies and a research question. So the research paradigm is how your kind of worldview of reality and what knowledge is. And most people in this room will know about the positivist paradigm, which is the kind of look at the biomedical science view that there is an objective reality out there that we can verify with tests. But conversely, we've got kind of the interpretivist paradigm, which sees that there's not one single reality, but that people differ in their experiences and understanding of reality, and there is multiple realities. And so often we're seeing things through the interpretivist lens when we're doing qualitative research, although not always. But it's really important to make that clear, and that should also be reflected in your research question. And if you've got queries about that, certainly you can chat later or go back to some of the recordings from the previous sessions. So realist, by the way, is a bit of both. So realist accepts that there is an objective reality out there, hence it's called realist, but also that this objective reality is interpreted by people differently. So it's a bit of both, and it looks to develop theory to explain how and why events occur, basically. So what we're often aiming to do is we've got our transcripts. Remember, an interview transcript may be 10 pages. We're going to have a lot of noise in there, and we're aiming to simplify the data, remove the noise in relation to our research question and in relation to the research paradigm we're seeing our research through, and to try and tell a compelling, relevant story. And that's really important, that story, because it becomes a story or an analytical narrative. It's not merely a description, it's trying to go beneath the surface. So a little bit about about reasoning, because that's really important, because when we're analysing. So I've mentioned this a little bit already, but deductive reasoning, many people in the room will be familiar with, because that's in keeping a lot with the biomedical sphere, which basically is your classic experiment. It's not just that, but that's the classical example when you start with a hypothesis and then you collect empirical data to test that hypothesis to confirm or refute this initial theory. But that's, say, within qualitative research, we can use deductive reasoning, but often we're using a mixture or inductive reasoning, which involves generating new theories and hypotheses based on observations and data. And perhaps an analogy to help see why that might be helpful would be if you were researching a new desert island, and I don't know, realized there's a new desert island in the Pacific no one had ever been to. You could go in there with a deductive approach and aim to perform an experiment to test a hypothesis, or you could just go there with a completely open eyes, writing down what you see, what you note, taking pictures, and collect data in that way, and that would equally provide really rich data about this new island. That can be done. It's called an ethnography, but it's just the principle of going into your data with a fresh set of eyes and noting what you see, rather than kind of testing a hypothesis or theory. Abductive is a bit of both. Abductive can take a little bit of time to get your head around. Is part of classical realist work as well, and abductive reasoning is basically it's kind of forming a logical inference based on observations. So it's kind of trying to find a best explanation. So inference to the best explanation. So it's finding what is the most likely explanation for something that was observed. You can use some empirical data to kind of test it, but by the end of it, you're never going to have absolute certainty. You're going to have a theory that could be then even tested further or refined further in the future. So it's a inference to the best explanation guess based on observations, and that's common in realist work. So inductive, deductive, and abductive. And this slide can illustrate that quite nicely. So deductive is a top-down approach, hypothesis, experiment, conclusion. Inductive is a bottom-up approach in which we are observing the data, and obviously there's overlap with the two with abductive approaches as well. Okay, so observing patterns within the data. So I'm not going to go through all of these. We'll go through a few of them, but there's lots of types of analysis. And again, going back to the comment I made about the importance of being very explicit regarding your research view, so your ontological or epistemological perspective, your analysis does need to reflect that. It needs to be consistent. But we'll talk about thematic analysis later, because the nice thing about thematic analysis is that it fits with lots of different methodologies. It's really flexible. But just to mention a few of these others. So content analysis is often used to study kind of documents and communication artifacts. So, for example, you might want to look at photographs, speeches, you might want to look at blogs and essays, and you can identify kind of important themes in relation to content. Framework analysis, I've done a framework analysis myself, is you often develop a framework that may use initially called deductive approach. So you develop a framework and then you develop the framework, then you apply the framework to the manuscripts or text thereafter. So it's quite systematic. So you'll have this framework with codes, and then you apply the codes to your work. Grounded theory we've mentioned already. It's the main aim of grounded theory is to generate theory, and we're creating theoretical construct which is grounded in the data itself. So it's very inductive in its approach. Grounded theory. Phenomenological analysis is all about experience, lived experience of individuals, and in particular aiming to develop what someone calls a thick description, so uncover the essence of those experiences through kind of a deep engagement with what the participant is describing. So it's all about experience. Case study research is very straightforward. It's trying to a very kind of in-depth exploration of a single event or institution. Can often use kind of mixed methods approaches where you use quantitative and qualitative data, so it's about a detailed account of a single event or situation. Discourse analysis is slightly different, so it's moving beyond. It's looking more deeper to look at how the language used can shape meaning and realities for participants, and particularly in relation to things like power dynamics. So often how something is said can sometimes indicate more than what's said, as we all know in kind of conversational use. So it can indicate power dynamics. And narrative analysis is all about the story, really. So it interprets stories shared by individuals, and understand how they make sense of their experiences and construct that reality. And it looks at the story as a whole, rather than kind of reducing it to kind of fragmented themes. Okay. So that's an overview, but today we're going to discuss thematic analysis, and we'll discuss that why in the next slide. So the great thing, so what is thematic analysis, first of all? It's quite a broad term, and it's used to describe qualitative data, and its aim is to identify patterns or themes within the data. And it's great because it can be used with lots of different methodologies. So some of those analyses I showed in the previous slide, you should really only probably use with some specific analysis with specific methodologies, otherwise it wouldn't fit. But thematic analysis you can adapt and use with things like phenomenological approaches, with grounded theory. You could use it for evaluation as part of a case study approach, as part of mixed methods. It's even used as part of analysis of qualitative analysis and systematic reviews. So it's really flexible. And what's really important is that the paper to look at is Braun and Clark. So Braun and Clark wrote a very important paper in, I think it's 2006. It's it's available. I don't think it's open access anymore, but it's available via university. It's about 20 pages long. For a methodology paper, it's very readable. Some methodology papers are an absolute nightmare to read, and it's a seminal paper because before this there was very kind of little methodological advice, medical guidance, and this kind of came out easily understandable, and it is overall very clear. But a key point is called, they talk about reflexive thematic analysis. And the word reflexive here is really important. So we're looking for themes and patterns, but also the reflexive part emphasizes the researcher's active role, the subjectivity and the critical reflection, so that the themes that are are they're constructed rather than discovered. So sometimes people, you might see in papers that themes emerge from the data. Well, reflexive thematic analysis will say that doesn't occur, that the themes are constructed, and will show probably why the concept of it emerging in the data is not really right. And there are 6 phases within it. So we'll go through those 6 phases in a little while. And it's overall, it's consistent with the kind of interpretivist or constructivist paradigm we've mentioned already about the acknowledging the researcher's active role in constructing the themes and interpreting the themes. And we've mentioned already it's flexible across methodologies and also data types. And it's great for looking at subjective experiences, beliefs, values, thoughts. Okay. So we're going to go through this now. There's 6 steps basically within Braun and Clark, and they are familiarization, data coding, generating initial themes, reviewing and developing the themes, refining, defining, and naming the themes, and producing the report. And I said I would highly recommend, if you've not read this paper, to read it. You read it in about 2 hours, and it's overall readable. Okay. So let's go through it in order. So it's very easy when you've got your transcript. Your outcome from your output from your data collection will either be an audio recording, which you can either transcribe yourself, or you can pay for it to be transcribed. But increasingly, I think like AI, Teams has an AI auto transcription that I'm planning on using my qualitative package work in my PhD. But there can be value in actually transcribing it yourself, because you're doing that familiarization process as you do that. So it's really important you don't kind of dive in straight away and start coding. We'll discuss what coding means, but basically what you'll do is you're immersing yourself in the data by reading. Okay, and you're making yourself familiar with the depth and the breadth of the content. And it's usually a process of repeated reading of the data. So really, it should be more than once, although once is an absolute minimum. And when you're reading it, it's really important that you're reading in an active way. So many of you have done communication schools will know about active listening. You're not just listening kind of, you actively concentrate listening to what the patient is saying and what that might mean. It's kind of the same here, that you're reading it not with a kind of vacant brain, but you're trying to look for meanings and patterns and so on. Initial this phase as well, it can be helpful to have a little memo by your side, so you perhaps jotting down. I wouldn't recommend writing loads, but a memo, just perhaps initial thoughts, or even you will discuss also the reflexivity element. Perhaps if you notice your own biases and assumptions coming in, so having a memo document on your laptop can be helpful as well. Remember, if you've got 10 interview transcripts, each transcript may be 10 pages long, so we're talking about 100 pages. So that's potentially going to take a lot of time, even in the first step. Okay. And then you're going to create your codes. Okay. So a code can be defined as, this is from Braun and Clark, a feature of the data that is interesting to the analyst. And it's the most basic segment of data that can be assessed in a meaningful way. So it's the most basic segment. It's descriptive, although the code you apply ideally should be rooted in the participant's response or language. And you can go through it. And at this stage, you don't need to be too worried about, when people in the first qualitative analysis can be worried, am I coding too much or too little? And I wouldn't be too worried about it, because later you can eliminate codes, you can combine codes together. But what you code, you can code as much as you want, and I wouldn't be too worried about it. Probably more the better. But what you code will depend on the research question, including its breadth. So if you've got a very broad research question, just to explore the experiences of, you might code quite widely. If it's more narrow, such as, how is a certain phenomena, how is a certain one perceived, or it's more narrow, then there may be fewer codes. One thing that gets discussed quite a lot is how how perhaps we'll discuss that themes a little while. So code the data, code it very code according to the research question. Other things that can determine what you apply. Sometimes you might see in research papers that analysis is theory driven, so they might use a theory to guide their analysis. So example might be, say, if you wanted to research motivation, what motivates final year medical students to prepare for an exam, you could decide that you're going to use a theory such as self-determination theory, that motivation is determined by autonomy, relatedness, and self-efficacy. It's a very well-known theory. You might then apply your codes specifically in relation to that theory, so only code things that are relevant to the theory. So don't get too worried about that, but you might see that sometimes that a theory-driven approach, but most of the time, particularly early when you start this, it will be simply what you note in the data in relation to your research question. Okay, and then you want to write down. You can create what's called a code book. So the paper on the left is a code book, just so you're keeping a track of the number of codes you've got. So you're being organised. What you're going to do then is you're going to get all the excerpts you've coded. You're then all the excerpts are the actually what the participants said, and you're going to put that in a list under that code, and we'll come back to that in a little while. So all the codes will have all the excerpts underneath that. Okay, and we'll discuss why that's helpful in a little while. We will perhaps discuss technology a little while Dr. Prof. Barrett and I were discussing this before, but you can use some software, software called NVivo. This can make this process a lot easier, but it's not essential to use NVivo. You can do it with a pen and paper just as rigorously. Okay, and we've got some examples in a short while of that. So then once you've got this code, now you might have 50 codes, you might have 60, you might have 30. Some projects will have over 100 codes. You then need to pull these together into themes. An important distinction to make is that codes are descriptive, but themes are analytical. And a theme contains some level of patterned meaning within the data set in relation to the research question. One question that gets asked a lot, and this is still debated among scholars, is how much information do you need to have as a theme? What point does it become a theme? If one participant, if a code is applied to one participant, is that enough? It's not an easy answer to that. The key part is not really about quantity, although usually a code will have been applied to more than one participant, usually. But it's more important, less about quantity, more about whether it captures something important in relation to the overall research question and the phenomenon you are researching. There's no doubt that researcher judgment is necessary to determine this, hence why it's a reflexive thematic analysis. And the themes are really a powerful way of seeing trends within the data. You can also create sub-themes as well. So a theme may have certain sub-themes underneath it as well. And don't worry at this stage as well if you have codes that don't seem to fit anywhere. You can put them in a miscellaneous pile and then come back to it, and you might find that actually that code goes under that theme. It might be that the themes change and then do become relevant, or they might get discarded. So again, don't worry about that at this stage. Okay, so we've developed some themes that are analytical. We need to then review and revise the themes. Okay, so this is a really kind of fun part, and you really kind of get to appreciate some of the meaning within the data, some of the richness within the data. And what you're doing essentially is some themes will get merged together. Some themes will get removed entirely. Some codes may get moved. This is a really important part, and this is iterative. So often then you may well go back to the data and you may well reread the transcripts again to see if it fits. But importantly, there are two parts to this. There's two kind of levels. So level one is reviewing at the level of the coded data extracts. So you remember we talked about the data extracts or excerpts. You need to kind of read all the extracts for each theme. Okay, so all the extracts for each theme, And does it appear consistent or coherent within that theme? So if you're reading the excerpts, the extracts, and it doesn't fit with the overall theme, then something's not quite right, and that's telling you need to revise it. So you either move codes, or you combine themes, or you split themes. It's not quite right. So that's the first part. So looking at the coded extracts under the themes, and does it fit with that themes? The second part then is actually similar, but in relation to the entire data set. So say if you think, hang on, these themes look pretty good, you then need to look at the validity of the themes in relation to the data set. So what you might want to do then is read all. So you've got your thematic map on your table. You might then read all the data, and you think, read every single interview transcript again, or focus group transcript. See, does this fit overall? Actually, do you think does this credibly or faithfully reflect the data, the transcripts? Okay, and if you reread the transcripts and think, hang on, yes, this just sits about right, perfect. If you read and think, blimey, I don't think actually that there's something else that's really important that I've missed there, that doesn't quite work out, or hang on, it's just not quite right. It's not really quite faithfully reflecting the meanings within the data set as a whole. And so there you two ways. And what you're looking for is you're looking for consistency or homogeneity within a theme, but you're looking for sufficient difference and clear distinctions between the themes. And that's when you know when you've got it about right, alongside it kind of reflecting the data overall. Write your narrative. This is incredibly important, and in my experience, writing the narrative transforms the piece of work. So you're going to have a thematic map. We'll give you an example in a minute. You need to write the narrative. You need to tell the story, and you need to tell a coherent story, and choose quotes from the data that back up. Because what you're trying to do is you're trying to show that your data analysis is credible and faithfully reflects the what the rooted in the participant's experience, and it should go beyond describing the data, but also have some analytic narrative, and go deep in the surface and make an argument for the claims you've made. And this does transform your work. We'll have a chat about some of the challenges in going from description to analysis in the write-up. So this is a very simple diagram, but helpful. Themes, sub-themes, code, and data transcripts to support it, basically. So in terms of your how you actually do it, there's lots and lots of different ways you can do it. I'm just going to show you what I did, and this is very similar to how I did my piece of work. So I simply coded. I did an inductive coding initially during my first qualitative project on barriers, and underlined. People do it different ways. So this seems probably a bit later on in the analysis, where I think it looks like perhaps the red are codes. No, the red is a theme. I think the yellow probably some sub-themes, and then there's the extracts there to support it, and then you can move things around. So that can help, depending on how you work, how to start to kind of spot themes in the data. I did it this way, but that's and then quite similar kind of post-it notes. And what I would reiterate is this: using NVivo or software doesn't improve the quality of your work. I would strongly say it doesn't make it more rigorous. It doesn't make it more likely to be published. What I would say is that if you've got large amounts of data, so for example, say if you've done 30 interviews, managing the mess can become really, really hard. And if you're trying to look at then all your extracts under a code, it might become nigh on impossible. So I would say it's not essential if you're doing a master's level project. If you're having lots of data and you're worried about organization, it can be helpful to use NVivo, but you can produce a very good qualitative research project using thematic analysis without using any technology. And we may talk about AI in a short while as well. Again, I think this is just helpful for looking at for trying to identify themes. So these could be codes. Sometimes you're really struggling to find the links, and just sometimes having it a bit like almost like an anagram. When you're trying to work out an anagram, you can perhaps start to identify links and common patterns within the data. So it can be quite helpful. This one here is not very clear. I think it's not very clear as the size, but one thing I would take away from this is you can see there's a comment called, there's a column called reflexive activity, in which the researcher here has documented their own kind of assumptions, biases, thoughts, and what's been going through their head, why they've coded that. And I think that's really important part of adopting this reflexive approach, to acknowledge that what you're trying to do is develop a shared meaning. So your analysis is rooted in the participant's experience, but also that you have played an active role in constructing this. So it's a shared process. And that is often what you'll come out with. So in Braun and Clark, this is the typical thematic map. So the red is the theme, the blue is the sub-theme, and the green are the codes. And you can see the transformation from the thematic map to the actual write-up. The write-up is incredibly important because it forms the analytical narrative. Okay. So this is again important. So this is a metaphor of themes, diamonds, of buckets, diamonds, and stories. So you've got a bucket type analysis where the themes are essentially kind of topic summaries, and all the data relevant to the topic is chucked in a bucket. And you do see this where it's incredibly descriptive. So it's almost they've done the disassembling, reassembling, but haven't done the analysis. And it makes sometimes for a bit of a boring, superficial read. And it's not quite what you're looking for often in a thematic analysis. Second metaphor is the diamond. So diamond is kind of the knowledge you're trying you're aiming to find the knowledge. The knowledge is in there in the transcript, and all you need to do is discover it or find the theme, and it will emerge by itself. But this is now, Braun and Clark would certainly say that the idea of it being discovered is not quite right, because it assumes a passive role of the researcher and a passive role of analysis, and it denies the active role the researcher plays in identifying patterns and reporting them to the reader. And I'm sure what we've just discussed, it's not quite right. And then you've got this themes as interpretive of stories, interpretive stories that are rich. They're multifaceted and multidimensional. You're aiming to get shared meaning that is organized around the key phenomena. And it's created by the researcher through this kind of analytical engagement. And what we're really aiming for is stories overall. And I just give you an example, the research project we did, Hugh, Prof. Alberti and I, which was my first thematic analysis that I did in about GP training in 2017. And we looked at the barriers to involving GP trainees and the medical students in primary care, and we identified quite a lot of barriers. This was from the GP trainer perspective. So the GPs who train GPs who train GP trainees, they came out with a lot of things. They said, the GP trainees don't have time to teach. They've got their exams to focus on. They said, their exams are more important. I'd let them teach once, but it wouldn't be normal to do more than that. Or, they're here to learn to become a GP. And we developed quite a lot of descriptive themes from that around themes in relation to the trainee, the practice, and other bits and bobs. But what we did when we really got to the interpretive side, what we felt it all boiled down to was a culture issue, in which the barrier really was that it was seen as very abnormal for GP trainees to teach whilst on placement in general practice. It wasn't normalised. It was seen their role as a learner rather than a teacher, and that teaching was seen as an extraneous part of GP training. And that's what we really boiled down to, and that was our story, really. That came through the kind of prolonged engagement iterative approach. And the story we told then, although the first few themes are quite descriptive, it all led up to this point. So there were descriptive stories, but in the context of a developing story that was getting to a point. And that was how we portrayed it. Okay. So what we're going to do now, if there's any, we're going to do a little exercise, so maybe 10-15 minutes. So these are some codes that have been applied. So someone has asked a great research question of how did disabled medical students experience the transition to online learning during COVID-19? These are some codes, and we've got some extracts or excerpts beneath them. And we want to see, can you pull these together into some themes? And perhaps have a think. No, again, there's no particular right or wrong answer, but think about any codes that have some similar patterns, and perhaps just importantly justify why you've organized it in the way you have. Okay, and yeah, so shall we do that?
Did everybody have a go at that? Most importantly, do we still have Mike?
Yeah.
Oh, great.
I had
a moment there, Mike, where I was thinking I might have to carry the questions, and that was not going to be good.
We haven't got much time, have we? So I'm just wondering whether, hopefully, that was a meaningful experience to practice that. I don't know what you think, whether we should open up some questions or we should give some top tips, or what you think.
Well, how about we spend maybe just 2 or 3 minutes, even if anybody had any immediate
Yes.
questions, because I know that was quite quick just to look at it. But actually, what was interesting even in our group is, that initial glance at it, we all probably approached that in slightly different ways and saw different ways to combine those kind of codes into themes as well. And we were making the point that actually that's why you need to do it and reiterate it and have a couple of people look at it with you. But did anybody have any questions for Mike, even just about that particular excerpt there?
I bet this is not my research, but I can tell you what I think some of the themes are. It's not my research. Margaret, yeah.
Yeah. How do you go from very superficial coding? So we were like saying number 1, 2, and 3 were all technical aspects, but then it's just not a really great theme, whereas then 4, 5, and 6 were all around connection or not, lack of connection. And that's a much better theme. So how do you, what tips do you have for delving into how you analyze so that you get much more deep, meaningful themes than much more like very superficial, like connections, like something like technical,
Yeah, very good. Shall I answer that, or do you want to answer, Prof. Barrett, or?
No, Mike, please go ahead.
I'll answer. Prolonged, I think, yeah, it's a very, very, very good question. Certainly kind of prolonged engagement. Yeah. So yeah, latent or semantic themes. So semantic themes refers to things on the surface, and latent themes are the deeper things. But even with a semantic, you have to be Braun and Clark's. There's some, but yeah, basically, prolonged engagement. So you need to, it won't come overnight. And I probably won't get around to discuss that, the things about credibility within, in terms of rigor and quality. If someone has claimed to have done a qualitative research project in 2 weeks, it's probably not very rigorous because I haven't had that prolonged engagement. So prolonged engagement is really important. Working as part of a team can be really helpful. And then you do need to, things like deviant cases. So if someone hasn't said something, say, well, why? So if somebody, you're forming your themes and you've got someone who has a very different view, thinking, why have they got that opinion, and what might that tell us about the actual theme itself? And also considering, what all this might mean in relation to the underlying social and cultural context. We talk about reflexive thematic analysis. We all have our own views. It's very rarely entirely inductive because we all have preconceptions based on our understanding of the literature, of the current challenges, of what we think might be going on. So perhaps delving deeper into understanding how and why something is occurring. So I agree with you about there's something about relations there. I think that was something about the relational aspect. But I think that could then come through in a more deep way with rereading. I also thought about the interface. That was something that came to me. There's something about this interface between the student and the online learning, and whether that's kind of very porous, that interface, or whether there's big barriers in place. And that might then allow you to get a bit deeper. And that's based also on my understanding of barriers to learning, which I know. So you're always bringing on your previous experiences as well, and that's why it's reflexive. Yeah.
And I think even having that theoretical framework sometimes for these types of work as well, just that lens to look through. So if you're thinking about those deeper concepts, like around, you know, say Margaret, in our situation around professional identity as well, zoning in on that and trying to kind of think, well, what are those identity kind of related themes that we're starting to see, or codes or sub themes or whatever. But I think you definitely need to have, Mike, and I don't know how you feel, I feel really strongly that one lens on this, one pair of eyes, you'll only see certain things. And every time you go back, you'll probably only see the same things. Whereas actually, if you can set this up for yourself, and I tried to find a photo of when I did mine, but you also, as well as understanding the paradigm that you like, it's actually the way you like to visualize things. And if NVivo works for you, that's super. For me, I needed flip chart sheets with different color coded post-its so I could physically move them around, and they were on a wall, and I could walk away. And then actually I could come back in the room 2 days later and actually say, oh my gosh, I totally missed that. That was actually what they were trying to say in this group of yellow post-its. Actually, that's not the title I should have in the pink one that's over those as well. So it's about learning about yourself a little bit too, and what ways help you, I think, Margaret, to dive that bit deeper and think about them in a more meaningful way as well. But I am very conscious we have 3 minutes left. If anybody does have any particularly burning questions, again, for Mike too. And Margaret, I hope that kind of answered your question, but it's a bigger philosophical question, I think, as well. Any other big questions for Mike? I thought we'd need to fill some time and talk about AI, Mike, but look, we don't even need to talk about AI today.
Do you want me to give you my
But
3 tips? Do you want me to, because that works
that
as
would be
a current
amazing.
slide. So
So I
3
asked Mike
tips.
for his 3 key
Yeah,
take
so
home messages today.
one thing, if you're, depending on what you're doing, whether you're a student doing a research project or doing a master's, do think about time. It's very, very time consuming. I hope I've illustrated that to you. You know, even the initial familiarization, how long that's going to take you. So consider what time you've got available. If you've got a 6-week summer internship, doing 10 interviews is not going to work. Do 2 or 3 as a phenomenology, or max four focus groups. So think about time and whether you've got the time to do it. And quantity is not always quality. You can do a very good phenomenological study on 2 or 3 interviews, for example. So one is time. 2 is the aim for analysis, not description. Easier said than done. We've discussed that. Was a great question, Margaret. But just remember that a bucket analysis is not really what you're aiming for. And if you read a research paper, perhaps go and have a look at some qualitative research papers. How analytical is it? A bucket paper you can spot, and you always kind of feel a bit disappointed. Although some will be descriptive, as our paper was. I did have a 3. Remember your research lens. The biggest problems occur when there's an issue there where, one, the lens is not specified in the first place, so you don't know how they're viewing how the research viewing the world. Or 2, when you specify a research lens and then the analysis doesn't fit. So, for example, if the analysis says 5 out of the 7 participants commented that they felt scared when they went into the consulting room, that's not really what we're after here. We're not bothered about quantity. We're just looking at whether it contributes to answering the research question, understanding things like experience, meaning, but quantity is not important. So making sure the analysis fits the epistemological perspective, that's really important. That's where a lot of papers get into trouble, because they don't, basically. Yeah. So my three points are time. Remember your research lens. And what was the second one? I've forgotten it. Off Barrett. I can't remember.
Oh, you were saying about the kind of keeping track of it as well, and making sure about the lens through which you view it is explicit as well.
Exactly. Yeah. So yeah, and get practicing. It's really good. It's really good fun. And even, you know, in our group initially, people saying, well, how do we make this into a theme? And after a few minutes, people were coming up with themes that are all seem very reasonable, and that would be refined with time. Yeah.
Mike, that's super. Thank you so much. And yeah, we didn't get into AI, but I think it was just to kind of make the point Mike and I talked about earlier about, you know, no matter what way you do this, having a trail that is obvious, and particularly if you're doing this for your MD or your PhD, that, you know, as an appendix, you put in either photographs of your post-it notes and how you made that kind of connection between your initial codes and your final kind of set of themes, and having that track. through photographs, or obviously through in vivo, you can use your various drafts and iterations of that too. But just make sure that that piece is clear and transparent, and that's the credibility piece that Mike was talking about as well. It's also the reflexive piece and making notes about how and where and when and why you made changes, but having that second and third person to look at those as well and to challenge what you're doing all the time and to have those conversations. So Mike, huge thanks today. Marta, I can't remember the date for the next incubator workshop, but it's in about a month, so hopefully
it's 15th of April.
15th, that's super. So hopefully you can all join us then again as well. And I hope that actually as this series has gone on, that some of you have some work now developing, some of you have some studies in progress, and then that hopefully by the end of this series you feel a bit more empowered to finish that off, all of that lovely work that you're doing, to really get in there with your transcripts that you've had hanging around there now for a little while that you were a bit nervous about doing. It's going to get stuck in, and that's going to be on your to-do list soon, and start to do your analysis as well. So thank you all so much for joining us today, and hopefully see you in a couple of weeks.